Arthur Dawson is a writer and historical ecologist. As a writer, Arthur has published numerous articles and poems. His books include a local bestseller, The Stories Behind Sonoma Valley Place Names, as well as Saying This Place Right, Poems of Landscape and Language, Arthur's column, Stories Behind... Let me try that again. Sorry, Arthur. This is well written. I've read it 2 or 3 times. You may not hear that way. The anticipation of beer has got me flummoxed here. Arthur Dawson is a writer and historical ecologist, and as a writer, Arthur has published numerous articles and poems. His books include a local bestseller, The Stories Behind Sonoma Valley Place Names, as well as Saying This Place Right, Poems of Landscape and Language. Arthur's column, Stories Behind Sonoma... Arthur's column appears in the Press Democrat. Almost at the same
Have another
as a
drink,
historical
Joe.
ecologist. Thank you. He has collected oral histories, developed archives, and contributed field and archival research to local and regional restoration efforts. Arthur has a degree in natural resources from Humboldt State University and lives in Glen Ellen with his wife Jill and their 2 teenage sons. Please give a warm sunrise welcome to Arthur Dawson.
At least you didn't call me a hysterical ecologist. Historical, thanks. You know, I consider myself a morning person, but this is very impressive to see you guys do it at 7 o'clock in the morning. So thanks for having me, and thanks, Joe, for inviting me, and thanks for the good breakfast. Great to be here. I work both in historical ecology and also in cultural resources, and I'm really interested in the land and also the people that have lived here. So it's really the relationship between human beings and the landscape, and so that's how I get into things like historical ecology and also into people like Jasper O'Farrell and the folks who are here have been here before us, who I think of as our not our ancestors but our landcestors, to coin a phrase. So Jasper O'Farrell, I think of you know, the people that historical figures in Sonoma County who I'd like to meet. Jasper O'Farrell would be right at the top of the list. A really impressive guy on just many different levels. And to understand him, oh, by the way, I don't have a watch and I don't see a clock, so if somebody could warn me when I'm getting... Just like, I go too long. Okay. I don't have to... Okay. And, you know, actually I was picturing more maybe a crowd of 10 or 20 people, so this was more than I expected. So here's a picture of Jasper O'Farrell. I think I'll just pass this around so you can have a moment with Jasper yourselves. And on the back is one of the surveys that he did, and if you turn that over, I'm not going to do it now because I only have 2 hands, but if you open this up and turn that over, there's a detail from that just shows you, you know, how meticulous he was when he did these surveys. So to understand Jasper, you really have to go back and look at his family history. And he was originally from Ireland, and way back in the 1100s, when Ireland was being repeatedly invaded by the Vikings, the Irish were beginning to defend themselves, and there were, you know, a number of small kingdoms in Ireland at that time, and one of the kings, whose name was Brian Boru, was one of the more famous ones, was fighting against the Vikings in the Battle of Clontarf, and at a key point in the battle, another Irish king came in with his men and turned the tide, and that's seen as really the moment when the tide turned from the Vikings kind of being in control to the Irish taking over or beginning to win back their homeland, at least for that time. And so the king who came in to rescue Brian Boru, he was given the nickname Farrell, which means noble warrior. And he was from Central Ireland and had a kingdom, and so his descendants were all called O'Farrells. They were, you know, the children of Farrell, or the descendants of Farrell. So they were the O'Farrells, and they called their kingdom Annalyn. And the translation is not certain, but Anne may relate to ideas of prosperity and fruitfulness, and the ending, Ali just means or Ali, however you want to say it, just means like a district. So kind of a fruitful place would be one way to translate that. So the kings of Annalee, or the lords of Annalee, ruled that kingdom for about 500 years, and then the English started coming into Ireland and started taking over Ireland, and much like in this country, the native Irish became dispossessed of their land. And O'Farrells hung on for a long time, but eventually they were dispossessed, and they ended up having to move to another part of Ireland. And so that's where Jasper O'Farrell was born. It was in County Wexford near Dublin in 1817. And his family had been dispossessed now for a couple hundred years, but certainly he knew the family history as he was growing up. And so he was educated there and went to higher education in Dublin and was trained as a civil engineer. And then as a young man, he got on board a ship that was bound for Chile in South America and ended up there. And I'm not quite sure how it happened, but he ended up, as he was in South America, he learned surveying. And so he did a number of surveys along the coast of South America, and he was slowly making his way north, probably heading eventually toward British Columbia was his plan. But before he got there, he landed in Sausalito in 1843, and basically became a Californian from then on. And he was a man who seemed to be able to be in the right place at the right time. So not only was he could speak Spanish by that time, so he could speak with the Mexican population, because this was still part of Mexico. He was also Catholic, which of course the Hispanic population was Catholic, and he also had skills as a surveyor, which, as far as I know, he was the first trained surveyor in California. So he had these skills that everybody wanted, and he very quickly his skills became in high demand, and he started doing surveys up here in the North Bay. He surveyed the Petaluma Rancho, Vallejo's Rancho, surveyed the Estero Americano Rancho over in the west part of the county, surveyed a number of places in Marin, and even went down into Southern California and surveyed some large ranchos down there. One of them was Governor Pio Pico's rancho. And so this was, so he became well-known and well-liked by the powerful people in California at that time, very, very, very quickly. And so he'd only been here about 3 years when the Bear Flag Rebellion happened, and then California eventually became part of the United States. So just within the course of maybe 2 or 3 years, he became this very well-known person in California. And once the United States took over, he then again was in high demand by the U.S. government, and he was appointed the California surveyor by the military government here. And at this time, San Francisco was starting to grow, even though the gold rush hadn't quite happened yet. It was starting to grow, and he built a house there, and he married a woman named Mary McChristian, who had come out with her family from Missouri by wagon train in about probably 1845, and they got married a year or two later. He was about 30, she was only about 16, which to modern ears sounds a little strange, but it wasn't uncommon in those days for that type of age difference for a married couple. So he continued to do his surveying. He surveyed San Francisco, and this was a man who had a lot of vision. At that time, San Francisco was still pretty small, and his survey of San Francisco, he laid out the town to be a pretty big city, even though most of it was still unsettled. And part of the idea was the city could sell lots and then make money off the lots, and that's how the city would generate income. And it was because of his vision that Market Street ended up being the main thoroughfare through the city. Some of the townspeople didn't like the idea of having this one street that was extra wide, probably because they owned land along that street and they lost some of their property. But O'Farrell had a vision of he could see that San Francisco was going to become something. This was even before the gold rush. He just could tell by where it was that this was going to become a big city. And so he he put that into his survey of San Francisco. He also surveyed a number of other cities around Northern California. He surveyed Sonoma, he surveyed Benicia, Martinez, Vallejo. So his mark is really all over the place up here. After he and Mary got married, he ended up, he'd been paid in land for some of his surveys with Rancho Nicasio, but he had his eye on Rancho Cañada de Jonay, if I'm pronouncing it right, which is immediately, which immediately west of town here. I think the border was actually like Florence Street, so we're very close to that rancho. And then that extended to the west, and then he also acquired the Rancho Estero Americano, and he ended up with about close to 20,000 acres between those two ranchos, and built his home up, I think, just this side of Freestone. It says it's at the top of a pretty steep hill, so I'm picturing that hill you go over as you go down into Freestone. Maybe somebody here knows exactly where his home was. And Cody was, yeah, yeah, that's where that road is, yeah. So, he built his home there, and something I haven't mentioned about him is not only was he a very skilled person, but he was also very gregarious. He had a personality that people just liked. He was very social, so that became a social center out there in the west part of the county, and so people would go there to hang out with O'Farrell and probably play music and have gatherings, maybe a little bit like this, eat and have a good time with each other. When gold was discovered, O'Farrell went up into the gold country with 4 other men, and they managed to find about $75,000 worth of gold between them, which is a lot of money, but not a gigantic amount of money, and they split it 5 ways. But unlike many of the other miners, they found their gold and they came back, and then they invested. O'Farrell at least invested, in his ranch operation. So during the gold rush, you had all these people just swarming into California, and there was really no infrastructure for them. And so again, a man in the right place at the right time. He had cattle he could sell because San Francisco needed food. It was growing, it was doubling in size at one point every 2 weeks. So tremendous demand for food in San Francisco. Hunters were coming up from San Francisco to the North Bay to do market hunting. So when O'Farrell first got here, there were herds of several hundred tule elk wandering around Sonoma County. There were grizzly bears here. There were pronghorn antelope. It was just an incredibly abundant place for wildlife. By the early 1850s, the last tule elk that was killed in Sonoma Valley was killed in 1852. So it just happened very rapidly that these things disappeared. Last grizzly bear in Sonoma Valley was, I think, the same year, or maybe a year after. So a tremendous impact, but he saw it before that happened. So he had that experience of watching what was happening as the world rushed into California. And also, he grew potatoes, his Irish red potatoes. Who would guess an Irishman would sell potatoes? Became in high demand in both in San Francisco and also up in the gold country. So he was providing food for the miners and for the citizens of San Francisco. And so by that time he wasn't doing much surveying. He was devoting himself to his ranch. He and Mary had 8 kids. I think the last one was born around 1860. 5 of them survived to adulthood, which that was probably not an uncommon ratio in those days. And he decided to take up politics. So, and he was also, I should also mention, he was, besides having a great personality, he was just known for being a man of high integrity. He did these surveys. People trusted his surveys. And these surveys had to hold him in court because there was a lot of land squabbles going on. And so he was just known as a man of real integrity. So he ran for office a couple times, finally was elected state senator from Sonoma County in 1858, served in the state senate for several years. He ran for lieutenant governor in 1860 and almost became lieutenant governor, just lost by a small margin. And one of the things that impressed me about him during his time in the state senate, Native people were being treated extremely poorly in those days. You know, in Mexican times, they were treated a little bit better. I wouldn't say it was a great situation, but they were still considered potential citizens, maybe second-class citizens, but at least they were potential citizens. Under American rule, you know, there was a bounty on native scalps. You know, there was wholesale slaughter going on in many places. It was you know, a terrible time for the native folks. And what happened in Sonoma County is the native folks here were rounded up in 1856 and taken up to Mendocino County, up to Round Valley. Some of them pretended that they were not native, pretended they were maybe Mexican or some other, some group they felt like they could fit into. But most of them were rounded up and taken up to Round Valley, up in Mendocino County. And the problem was that there were also settlers up there, and so there was just a lot of conflict. And if a settler noticed some of his cows missing, he would just go out and shoot an Indian. I mean, a lot of these guys, it didn't matter who had done the stealing. And of course, they saw it as stealing, and the native people they were just trying to survive. Well, you know, Farrell kind of understood the situation, I think, better than anybody else at the time. He went and did kind of an investigatory trip up to Mendocino County. And you know, maybe because of his experience in Ireland, where his people had been dispossessed, he understood a little bit of what the native people were going through. And when he came back, he wrote a letter to the state senate and said, you know, this is what, you know, basically the government is condoning these murders that are happening. And the reason that these are happening is because native people are just trying to survive, and you know, they're being killed. There's no legal. So this isn't going through the courts. It's just somebody deciding to go out and shoot somebody as retaliation. You know, we really should be protecting the native people as well as protecting the property of the settlers. I'm not sure exactly what the fallout from that was, but I mean, slowly things got a little better for native people after that time. And we're still seeing, of course, the aftermath of that in some ways around here. But that just gives you a sense of Jasper's integrity and how he really understood things that other people maybe didn't understand at that time in California. Check my notes here. How are we doing on time? Okay. Oh, one thing that he did is he brought out his mother and sister and some of his brothers from Ireland in the 1850s. So he was able to bring his family out here to Annalee. And I don't know if I mentioned, so he called those ranches that he had, he ended up calling that Annalee Ranch. So he was naming it after his ancestral homeland back in Ireland. So it's kind of a neat, after all those hundreds of years, there was no Farrell who was in control of a land named Annalee again, which I'm sure he considered to be a fruitful and plentiful place, as this area is. And then he brought some of his family out. So, so he was kind of reestablishing the O'Farrell's land base. Let's see. Oh, so he was also, I mentioned he was Catholic, so the main charity that he donated to was the Catholic Church. He donated the land and also the lumber for building the St. Teresa Church over in Bodega, which may have been named after his sister. It was, I think it's officially after St. Teresa, but his sister's name was Teresa, so some folks think that maybe that really was after his sister. I've also heard that he donated the land for Annalee High School, so which I guess would have been just inside the Rancho boundaries if Florence Street was the boundary. But unfortunately, in the 1860s, there was a drought in California. Imagine that. And it was impacting his cattle ranching, and so he started having to mortgage off some of his property to keep his operation going, and so his lands became very encumbered by those things. And so by the time he died, there wasn't a whole lot left to give his family, and the family ended up having to sell off what remained of his ranch at that time. And that was 1875, so 140 years ago is when he died. But I think his legacy really lives on all over Northern California and even beyond. And he's one of those people, like I said, that I would would love to have had a chance to meet. And you know, looking at the four-way test, I think he would meet all those. So probably would have been a good honorary Rotarian. So thank you.
Do you know if any of his descendants still live in the area?
You know, I'm not sure where they live exactly, but and I just want to mention this is a book that came out recently by a man named Frank Baumgartner, and this goes into great detail about Jasper O'Farrell. So I'd recommend if you want to really get the nitty-gritty on Jasper, get this book. But anyway, on the back of this book, there is a quote from Janice Valderrama, who is a great-granddaughter of Jasper, and she says, there have been many myths and legends about Jasper O'Farrell. This book gives us a definitive account of his achievements and role in the planning and settlement of early California. So there's at least a few O'Farrell descendants around. Yeah?
Do you know, you mentioned that he sold potatoes. Do you know what kind of potatoes they were?
Irish red is what I heard.
They were Irish red? Okay.
All right. Are those still grown around here?
Well, actually, the reason I was asking is because there's a resurgence of the bodega red potato, and I was wondering if they might, and I don't remember the story about where the bodega red came from, but it's a heirloom potato from this area.
It could possibly be the same thing. It'd be interesting to look into that, yeah.
The bodega red was grown out on a ranch, with the old Cal Little Ranch, at the foot of Spring Hill School Road, Ferguson.
Thanks.
And you know, were those shipped out of Tamales or were they shipped out of Governors Landing?
That's a good question. I don't know. Yeah.
Any Russian vodka?
Yeah, either one would make, yeah, whatever it is.
That incidentally is why how the potato patch got its name. Down off of the Golden Gate is, is they used to run the barges down from both Tamales and from Governor Landing. And it was so rough that they used to lose lots of loads of potatoes.
So you can just cruise through and pick up some potatoes.
It's still referred to, or when I was a kid, as O'Farrell Hill. Going out there to, just as you crest before you go down into Freestone, where O'Neill Road comes on.
Yeah.
That's in the Rancho Canada de O'Neill, and that's O'Farrell Hill that is over there. Where Brian lives out on Ross, in that area going towards Forestville, that's the El Molino Rancho. They used to, when I was a kid, they had a sign that actually said the El Molino Rancho. It was still there. So lots of the old legal descriptions for properties make reference to those old ranchos. That was the first surveys that were available to insure properties, was it? That Jasper did. And the old ranchos, that's how they had it called. To determine where the property was.
Yeah, so yeah, you get an important service, yeah.
My property was the Williams Ranch, and it happened right around 1872, 1875. I think that time period is probably when a lot of the big ones were breaking down into the smaller ones, like it was 160 acres or something.
Yeah, Any other questions?
First of all, to present you with this gift of token of appreciation for your presentation. Great. And we have something called door prize. And I need you to all attend that, yes.
93.
Going home.
893.
All right, okay, the number is, the last four digits are 6877.
Oh, I got 6878.
We have a winner? 6877?
Oh, yeah.
Pull another. Yeah.
Next one is 6868.
Marty?
Jerry.
Rich get richer.
Here we go.
Oh!
So close. Hey,
Door
we
prize.
have a door prize. Dancing bull.
From meaning who brought it in.
Catching bull, that means.
Oh, and who brought it in? And beer. Wow.
And beer.
Woohoo!
Be there, we'll be there.
Beer?
It's not,
We did.
lost that.
And who did that for us? The door prize is from Dan Deedham.
Dan the man.
Thank you,
Dan
Dan.
man.
Okay, well, I think we have a joke reviewer, and that would be Jerry Mitchell.
Woo!
Jerry.
I have a guest jokester with me here today, my brother, who played jokes on me all the time. Keep me up all the time. Well, it's very ironic. This is another story about Jasper O'Farrell. I mean, this guy had a very, very large reputation, a huge reputation. In fact, came all the way down to Los Angeles. And I don't know if this is true, but I'll tell you the story, and it's in that book, by the way. So, in this area, out by Occidental, there was a fellow lived there, and a bear climbed up on his roof, and he could not get this bear down. And he didn't know what to do. He asked some of his neighbors, and he said, well, we have actually a bear removal service. And it just so happened that the fellow who was in charge of that was Jasper O'Farrell. And in that picture, you'll see he's holding a shotgun and a dog by his side. This is
Jerry was there.
Look how red Jerry is already.
Jerry was a
So he sends words to by his neighbors, and Jasper comes over in his buckboard, and he gets out of the buckboard, and he's got his shotgun, and he's got a really vicious dog on a chain. So, and a ladder. They're in a ladder. And I said, so, how are you going to get the bear down? He said, well, listen. He said, first of all, I'm going to take this ladder, I'm going to climb up on top of your roof. I want you to hold this shotgun and hold on to this chain to the dog. When I get up on the roof, I'm going to shoo the bear down, to come off the roof, and the dog is going to grab the bear by the testicle and hold on. And let me tell you, he is a vicious dog. So he tells him, well, what do I do with the shotgun? He says, well, if I fall down instead of the bear, shoot the dog.
They probably told that joke every Thanksgiving.
All right, we'll finish with a selfie, and then we'll dismiss, but I think we're about ready.
Ready? Here we go. Happy trails to you until we meet again. Happy trails to you. Where will we go? Keep smiling on the man. Happy trails to you till we meet again.